Have you ever heard of the Nuyorican poets?
Yes.
So there was a girl there named Maggie Estep. Have you ever heard of her?
Yes.
Yeah. So I knew her, and at about the time I was 19 or 20, and I failed with this other girl. I'd also failed with a girl that I liked that I worked with. Uh, I went to a Nuyorican poetry thing, and I met this Maggie Estep, and she was interesting. She wasn't particularly a great poet, but she ended up basically being a journalist, and she died about a decade ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and
And
you
you
know,
got hate mail from your eulogies and
yeah.
yeah.
Anyway, but so yeah, and so I knew I had a way with words, and it was just a matter of time. It took about 9 years though, from the age of
Hmm.
19 to 28, before I wrote my first great poem.
Hmm.
I did write. I was contracted by a company that's an infamous uh, vanity press. I won't name it because they're quite litigious. And I did publish a long poem with a vanity press, a different one. But once I had my first few great poems, I knew that I had it, and but even then I didn't think that I could ever write narrative, because poems are about moments, generally speaking. Most lyric poetry, at least. And I said, well, I'm a great poet, but I have to be the best, and
Yes.
so once I had 10 and 20 and then 50 and then 100 and plus poems, I'm like, I got to keep going. I did that for about 12 years. I haven't written poems since '05, not because I haven't had the impulses, but I take those impulses and feed them into to novels or plays. Um, and then I went on to the other stuff, writing that. So again, it's not my approach to writing, and my history with writing is going to be different than other people's. It worked for me. It might not work for someone else. It probably
Yes.
wouldn't. So you have to have enough confidence. The only way you have confidence, though, is if you focus on what that art is and know the general parameters, the general stuff.
Mm.
The specifics have to be your own. You can
Yes.
have general principles, but the specifics have to be your own. If, for example, uh, a woman whose stuff that I follow on YouTube is a gal who lives up in the Svalbard Island archipelago of Norway. And,
Yeah.
and I bring her up not because she's really an artist. She's a photographer. She does her videos and whatnot. But her whole shtick, though, is living in Svalbard, which is interesting for about 10 or 12 videos. And I remember I commented on one of her videos, you need to do more about the history of Svalbard, interesting stuff, because, how do you take a shit in minus 40-degree weather? You're running out of
Good question.
topics,
Right.
and
Yeah.
it's that way with a lot of artists, is that they have such a small purview. Open it up. I said this in a number of times. Where these microbes on a little pale dot
Yeah.
floating around a cinder in a galaxy that the observable universe might be, to the smallest thing we know, Planck length. What's out there might be infinitely larger than even that comparison. How can you just write about yourself?
Yes.
I'm bored with myself. That's one, and this is one of the things people say about art is art expresses yourself. Yes, one of my expressions is I'm not satisfied with just
Yes.
myself.
Right.
I
Right.
want I want to know more. I want to write about Catherine the Great. I did a trilogy of plays on the three greatest Khans. I've done plays on Alexander the Great, Cyrus the Great, and Sargon the Great. These historical figures are more interesting to me, but they do reflect. If I write a poem about Al
Mhm.
Capone, that says something about me. I don't have to write about, oh, my dick isn't as large as that black kid that I went to
Right.
school with 30 years ago. I'm not a man. This kind of stuff is bullshit that people just get caught up in, and it's stuff that really prevents them, even if they have the talent, from actually fulfilling everything, because they're dealing with art not as something that communicates. Art is ultimately communication. It's not necessarily my identity. Who gives a shit of my identity?
Mm.
Do I really believe that in 1,000 years, technologically speaking, people are going to still be hung up on all this stuff about religion and race and ethnicity and identity and sexual politics? No,
Hopefully not.
hopefully
Right.
not. Because if you go
Yeah.
back 1,000 years ago, there's no way they could have predicted that in 1,000 years we'd have been on the moon 50 years ago.
Right.
That we have computers that I mean, they're gonna that 1,000-year difference is gonna be probably a greater difference than where we are now to where we were 10,000 years ago.